All right, great. Thanks everybody for sticking around, and I'm really excited to discuss what really has been already a decade and a half of work amongst landowners, scientists, and stakeholders on the reintroduction of fire into grasslands of the Great Plains. What's interesting about this is that we're talking about one of the most controlled processes by human in nature today, and trying to restore that in a landscape where there's a lot of cultural and controversial aspects of it in an area that has had a lot of change as a result of our removal. So of course, it's very difficult to stay calm when you're a scientist studying fire and you see signs like this driving down the road. You almost veer off into a pasture somewhere. What I'm going to talk about is a book chapter that's been accepted with a number of co-authors. That book chapter is on adaptive management in rangelands. Craig Allen led the more general discussion, but there's a number of co-authors involved in this as well. This is one aspect of that chapter. Before really diving in, I think it's really important to recognize people that our society has awarded this morning with the Chapline Land Stewardship Award. Butch Taylor is trying to be incognito with a hat in the back, but he's the person who won that award. This is the result of a lot of his career work and his devotion with landowners and trying to help them restore fire throughout the Great Plains. If you know Butch, he can be quite a storyteller. This is him talking about the last fish he caught in Texas. If he caught that same fish in Nebraska, it would have been about this big. But not just Butch, there's also a lot of other people that have contributed to this, especially John Weir in Extension in Oklahoma State. He also has really devoted his career to helping landowners burn, and he and Butch are really close. Doug Wisenhunt with the NRCS in Nebraska. Also Chris Awanka, now postdoc in Nebraska. Sam Fullendorf, Dave Engel, Bill Rogers, Urs Kreuter, and a whole lot of landowners. So there's been a direct connection for a long time. Prescribed burn associations, what are they? These are neighbor help neighbor cooperatives where landowners are restoring fire back into the Great Plains. This is what one of these operations look like. Again, trying to restore fire by helping each other and really get it back onto the landscape to meet their objectives. What I find really interesting is that landowners don't think in terms of, oh yeah, I can't wait to install structured decision making as part of what I do. We're talking about landowners installing fire back into the landscape. And my observations after watching the growth of burn associations, which started in 1995 in Nebraska with the Prescribed Burn Task Force, on the Edwards Plateau in 1997, without even knowing, they start developing the same framework. Oklahoma had recent ones as well. Their successes have led a lot of other landowner groups to try this same model of landowners help each other burn. What I've been watching is inadvertently have they been applying this adaptive management framework, and can we learn things from landowners that are doing it in this way to develop some of these general principles that are of our general importance with collaborative landscape level management. I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of literature that talks about how adaptive management, while there's a lot of success about it, we have things like Craig Allen talking about it's failed more often than not, especially when we're talking about broad scales. This is a different Allen, but has failed in most large-scale applications, and also because of some of the aspects of trying to implement landscape adaptive management by our natural resource agencies, we're not really likely to see kind of Holling's view of adaptive management in its theoretical context. In agencies, we're more likely to see adaptive management light. Can we learn something from landowners that have a different set of structures operating on them in terms of this view? So this is an adaptive management framework that's part of this book chapter. Adaptive management involves structured decision making and learning. I'm going to just go through the process of how this fits into what landowners are doing with prescribed fire and talk about what's separating the successful from the not so successful burn association groups. So the first aspect, define the problem. This is a problem that was defined for them. We're talking about across much of the Great Plains, we've removed fire, things respond to what we change. So we have juniper increasing throughout our grasslands, whether you're talking about ash juniper on the Edwards Plateau or eastern red cedar in the Les Canyons of Nebraska, we have a similar problem occurring across a biome and transforming these systems. Here's maps from the NRCS. This is the Edwards Plateau. A lot of it converted to juniper woodland, or eastern red cedar occurring all the way there throughout the Great Plains. So it's one thing when we're talking about small scale problems that we're dealing with, this is a consistent problem that these landowners are facing across multiple states. So of course, what's the objective? Well, to a landowner, that's simple. How do we get back to that legacy of what we were afforded with before that led to so much productivity in these landscapes? So it's all about trying to move back into that kind of a state. This, of course, is Butch again, who's worked a lot with these landowners, and this next step of the adaptive management process is, okay, let's assess the different alternatives available to us. So brush management, something we can control. We really like internal combustion, right? So something we can control on these landscapes and implement, can be successful in restoring them. Or maybe we make super juniper eating goats, which they've selectively bred. They prefer juniper browse over other forages. Or we turn to prescribed fire. These are the three dominant reactive type of techniques we have to this change. The challenge when you're assessing them is that until we put wings on these things and they fly to the tops of trees, we're not likely to restore juniper woodlands to grassland, right? They're likely to hit that understory area and prevent further invasion. This is so expensive for landowners to implement that they're limited to small acreages. The NRCS in Nebraska, with some cost sharing for cedar with Doug Wisenhunt, shows that on average we do, over the last 10 years, 50 acres per project. And we're talking about a biome level transformation event. So these landowners are seeing that on these large landscapes and, okay, we're gonna turn to fire as what we do. So you've decided on fire, great, now let's elucidate the consequences, this next step of structured decision making. And this is the process that inadvertently I see landowners thinking about, okay, we're going to look at fire, but what are the potential risks? What are the consequences? And when we think of risks, we think of the most disastrous situation possible with prescribed fire. It gets away, and you now have something like this, where it could disrupt city or property or livelihoods. This has nothing to do with prescribed fire. This is the Bastrop wildfire that occurred just outside of Austin. The worst wildfire in Texas history. It occurred in 2011. This is what everybody looks at as the disaster scenario, which is Austin's view. I like to flip it and show, here's the view of the wildfire's view for Austin. This was grassland, live oak, savanna matrix, and now juniper woodland dominate all throughout the Austin area. So again, that's a potential risk. This is one of the obstacles that would lead to a paralysis of adaptive management, a paralysis to using fire, or any general technique through this process. All of these, I'm going to refer to them a number of times throughout the talk. This is from Allen and Gunderson in Journal of Environmental Management. Decision makers are overly risk averse and therefore never really get to those underlying challenges. So this would be an immediate stopping point with the use of fire. It's too risky. Of course, if you're a landowner, you then consider the trade-offs. And you're going, look at the trade-offs. I've lost a lot of my livestock production. So here's great data from Sam Fullendorf at the Sonora Experiment Station, where you get this 75% reduction in livestock production potential as you get a transition from grassland to juniper woodland. And I challenge anybody to take 3/4 of your paycheck and say, why respond to that, right? That's what we're talking about with landowners. So that type of a trade-off, okay, we're gonna consider those risks and we're gonna move forward. So we're back to using fire. We're gonna implement this management action. But how in the world do we do it? I'm just one person. And so we're at this next step. I'm unable to burn due to the lack of people, equipment, knowledge, or training. And how do we overcome it? The key aspect of what prescribed burn associations did is they used collaboration to overcome what for decades was a major constraint in the use of fire in the private sector. Rather than have one person, let's pool everybody together. You solve all of these issues immediately through collaboration. So it was a great part in terms of going from the structured decision making to now starting to get into the learning aspect and really implementing fire across broad landscapes. Now you can make that decision, but there's two new things, two new areas of overcoming this source of paralysis and adaptive management failure. You have to identify somebody that's actually going to have strong internal leadership. So there's not agency people on the board of these burn associations. There's not university scientists on the board. What you have are landowners completely leading this charge on their landscapes. And that internal leadership is really important and really motivating people to move forward in this type of direction. It avoids this stuck in a planning cycle with no actual action and use of fire or other things on this landscape. So we get to this learning stage. And there's lots of different pathways that these landowners are actually moving forward. We have landowners collaborating with landowners, landowners collaborating with scientists, and landowners collaborating with agencies. Each of these have lengthy stories and a lot of useful information over the last 15 years of what they're doing. I'm a scientist. I'm going to focus on the second one, but this is a very interesting story in terms of how we're moving forward together in terms of this learning process. One of the interesting aspects when I started my graduate studies in 2004 was looking at how certain we were that when you put fire into juniper woodland, it could not restore grassland. Decades of fire research had shown that we put fire as a treatment onto these landscapes, we killed very few trees, and therefore it had no restoration potential. That was the overarching conclusion. And so it led to this level of certainty, and that transitioned, rightfully so, into management frameworks like the ESD database, where fire alone is incapable of restoring a grassland ecosystem from juniper woodland. It then requires brush management, reseeding, and grazing management. Yet all those studies were built on, and this is not just in this area, this is fire ecology as a discipline. We light fire treatments and we observe what happens through this question: what are the effects of fire? What we did instead was experimentally attempt to elucidate thresholds. Let's change that question. Specifically, what intensity is required to kill a juniper tree? Because all of these studies are constrained by social norms and when it's socially acceptable to burn. So they're mild prescriptions that are easy and safe. It doesn't represent the theoretical context of what fire can do. So when we ask this, we see completely different results. So we established replicated treatments and burn when everybody else does. So these are mild, typical prescriptions. We kill a few juniper trees, but overall this juniper woodland persists. And what you get is a recommendation that actually is in the literature of 3,000 kilograms per hectare is what you need in order to kill juniper trees. Of course, grass doesn't grow very well under juniper trees, so it's a recommendation that you can't use. But that's what occurred as a result of this. So managers get frustrated. We put fire in here and it didn't work. Let's shelve it, let's move to something else, because fire can't work in the system. Yet if we burn in different conditions, we completely see that threshold disappear. All we did was burn in these are both in the growing season. Everything was similar except for fine fuel moisture content. All we did was target 2 months after a drought, we started lighting fires. So we're burning in more extreme conditions. We overcome the resilience of this juniper woodland state, restore that grass dominance. This comes into overcoming source of adaptive management failure number 5 and 6, especially with the science. Conducting experiments in appropriate conditions to really test the feasibility of some of these management practices and their potential. This is also a huge issue here. We often try and use adaptive management to further impose control on systems. What we're doing is embracing variation by using drought as a way to actually overcome limitations in fine fuel load and to be able to really have the effect that we want. So all of a sudden, drought's not all bad, right? We're able to deal with this issue by targeting it and embracing it to our advantage. We were able to use that and put this into a model to actually get at that question: what fire intensity is required to kill juniper tree? This is the start for us to be able to communicate to landowners what conditions do we need to burn under in order to meet your objectives. This has led to a direct transition. What's been really fascinating for me working on this process with landowners is they see this research and they ask me for publications on the topic because it's changing what they're doing on the land and they want to use it for certain purposes. What we've observed is that research is contributing to more growing season fires in these landscapes, whereas this was completely dormant season fires historically in terms of in recent history with what landowners would do. We're also seeing them burn outside of the typical prescriptions in order to meet their objectives. So this is a quote from a landowner in a Nebraska Burn Association. With one treatment, we generally have around 70% mortality of juniper trees in this area. What we're talking about is overcoming adaptive management failures number 7 and 8. So again, coming from Allen and Gunderson, moving beyond, follow these prescriptions no matter what. You can't burn in these prescriptions, you are crazy. Fire is supposed to be controlled with this prescription and never in a drought. That's what, anything stressed is bad. You can't burn when it's too high temperatures, too low humidities, too high wind speeds. We impose that control on what these groups are trying to do. They've moved beyond that. The other thing is that they're taking the science, they're taking their observations and really learning and modifying their management constantly. and they're hungry for it and constantly asking for it. That's resulted in landowners in Texas and landowners in Nebraska, again, both asking for science to really be able to further what they're doing. What was interesting is here's another map. Every dot represents a burn association. We now have over 50 burn associations in the Great Plains. This is a map from Dave Engel and others in a book chapter on juniper invasion in the Great Plains. When you overlay them two, notice how they're all responding to the problem. They're all where juniper is. What's interesting with this is everywhere in red is where landowners are shifting policy and law to their advantage. So those are areas where they're burning in burn bans often with government exemptions because it's recognized why it's important to meet their restoration goals. We now know that that's also occurring in the southwest area of Nebraska. So across the Great Plains, people are changing law and policy on prescribed fire. The successful ones are. The ones that are less successful are completely constrained by that, which is source of failure of adaptive management number 9. It doesn't matter how much these landowners are trying to do on these landscapes, how much they're learning, how much they're modifying their management. With fire, you can completely impose externally what these managers are able to do. And we have much less understanding of what's valuable and why these landowners are trying to do it than they do on their own landscapes. And this is one of the biggest things they identify as a critical limitation. One final point is that what's interesting about collaboration in this network is that it is fundamental to what they're doing at every level, and they're really moving to where it's different forms of collaboration across hierarchies. And this is really the future of this group. So we went from the ghost of prescribed fire management with a person burning their land to collaboration across multiple landowners to help each other burn and having this county scale impact. Now we're seeing states like Texas with the Texas Prescribed Burn Alliance, where you have multiple burn associations actually network together to have a state level impact and to learn from other networks and other collaborative groups. That's driven into a regional alliance. And so landowners in Nebraska actually know landowners in Texas by name and talk about how different groups are being successful. And what we're seeing is this national network that's going to form. And that's going to be a huge issue or a huge positive in terms of changing fire from a local issue to a national one. Because right now it's viewed as a very local one with local groups having this problem. When these are networked together, now they have a national foundation. And they're going to completely change these different scales of impacts. One final notice, there's a lot of information on collaborative adaptive management. It'd be nice to see more examples with this type of network with rangelands. This is mostly non-rangeland systems so far. There's a website people can go to and see a lot of very strong examples of collaborative adaptive management and different principles that have led to success. With that, I thank you for sticking around through the break. Here's an example of a future Nebraska grassland.